This is the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We're talking about the bleak situation in Detroit. This is really what people should be worried about, particularly black community, because obviously there are a lot of blacks living in Detroit. This is the dire situation over there. First of all, the city is $20 billion in debt. They have more than 100,000 creditors to whom they owe money. All right, that breaks down to a per capita debt of $25,000 per person. Now, the real problem there is that you've got a lot of poor people that live in that city that are expected to pay that, and that's $25,000 per person. That includes little kids. But here's the problem. 47% of the residents of Detroit are functionally illiterate. How are they going to pay their share of that $25,000 when they can barely even read and write? In fact, less than half of the people over the age of 16 have jobs. So how many people are literate and have jobs? What's their share of the $20 billion in debt? How is it possible to pay it off? See, all the working families have already left. The middle class is gone. The population has imploded because they've been chased out by big government. You know, as I said before the break, back in the 1960s, Detroit had the highest per capita income in the nation. They had the highest home ownership rate in the nation. They had an unemployment rate of under 3%. It was a great city. Now, I said it looks like a war zone. In 1950, despite the fact that America was a much smaller country population-wise, there were 296,000 people living in the city of Detroit working in manufacturing. Today, there's less than 27,000. So more than 90% of the manufacturing jobs have been lost. In fact, just since 2000, this city has gone, has lost, where I had that number, 48% of the manufacturing jobs that were still around in 2000 were gone by 2010. So, I mean, it's still deteriorating. I'm not sure how many more have been lost. I'm sure a lot more have been lost in the last 3 years, from 2010 through 2013. You've got 78,000 abandoned homes in the city. 78,000. Nobody is living in these homes. You've got homes. If you go to Zillow and look up Detroit, there's a bunch of houses you can buy for under $500. What does that tell you? $500. Nobody wants these homes. And, Detroit has one of the highest property taxes in the country. So even if you buy one of these homes, you're going to have to pay all these property taxes. So it's a complete disaster. Going into some of the problems in the city, 40% of the traffic lights don't even work. They don't even have money for the traffic lights because they're paying it all to their retired workers. They got nothing left to run the city. About a third of the ambulances don't even run, and I think the average mileage on each ambulance is 250,000. If you call the police, it's going to take about an hour for the police to arrive. So don't even bother. You better arm yourself because the police aren't going to do any good. In fact, there's so much crime in Detroit that fewer than 10% of the crimes are actually solved. I mean, the criminals, if you're a criminal, go to Detroit. Right? Nothing's going to happen to you. The police aren't going to get you, even if they're not going to solve the crimes. That's who wants to go to Detroit, is the criminals. And how are we going to change this? Is a bankruptcy going to change anything? No, if we don't get rid of the politicians that have destroyed this city, then the city's never going to come back. Nothing is going to change. You've got all this phony optimism out there. Listen to this. I think we got this sound ready. This is from MSNBC, Howard Dean, basically saying the city's going to come back and the leader is going to be the real estate market. It's going to come back because of housing. How is that even possible? Here, listen to this. It's cut number 4.
Detroit's going to come back. It is going to come back. When you have a medium home price of $45,000, people are going to go buy those houses sooner or later, but you've got to have a government to run the place.
Yeah.
No, they're not going to buy those houses. The reason the houses are so cheap is because nobody wants to live there because there's no opportunity. There's just a bunch of crime. There's no jobs. Why would you want one of those houses? How would you pay for your electricity? And you're just going to get robbed. I mean, nobody would want to live there. And what Dean is basically saying is we just need more government. No, we need less government. Yeah, we need enough government to keep the streetlights running and to keep the police force. But that's not the kind of government that you're going to get in Detroit. You're going to get a big government, socialist, labor unions in the hip pocket. You're never going to have a city that anybody's going to want to live in until we can clean house. And they're not going to do that because look who the electorate is. Nobody's working. They're all illiterate. This is an example of why democracy can't work. When the people who are voting are functionally illiterate, living on welfare and unemployment, right? And their minds have been so poisoned by the rhetoric of the left, the socialist propaganda. What hope does Detroit have of ever electing a competent government that's going to have a reason to revitalize that housing market? You got to bring the manufacturing back. You got to bring the jobs back. You got to bring the city back. Housing could follow, but you can't rebuild the economy on your hopes that the housing market is going to come back. Why the hell would the housing market come back? You know, one of the reasons that the home sales are going down is because prices have gone up, and so fewer people can afford to buy. But not only have prices gone up, but mortgage rates have gone up. So you got a higher price and a higher mortgage rate. That makes it a lot harder for people to buy homes. And again, the real buyers have been the speculators. They drove the prices up. They're going to drive them back down because I think the speculators are going to turn around and start to liquidate when they realize the mistake that they made by piling into this market because it isn't a real recovery. You know, all bear markets have phony rallies. You know, sometimes they call it in Wall Street a dead cat bounce, right? Meaning that even if you drop a dead cat off of a top of a building, it might even bounce, but it's not going to come back to life, right? It's still going to be dead. And the housing market is bouncing like a dead cat. It's not coming back to life, and it just bounced because it dropped from such a high level. And that's all you're seeing. And when Ben Bernanke realizes this, when the markets realize this, you know, they're going to have to be opening up the monetary spigots, doing everything they can to try to reflate this deflating housing bubble. But I don't think it's going to work. Hey, let me also play a little sound on Detroit. You know, is the president going to bail out the city of Detroit? Because after all, he claims that he already did that. This is a flashback. This is from October 2012. So this is well before the official bankruptcy. But this is what President Obama said when he was addressing the subject of Detroit in his weekly radio address. Here, let's listen to this, cut number 13.
Just a few years ago, the auto industry wasn't just struggling, it was flatlining. GM and Chrysler were on the verge of collapse. Suppliers and distributors were at risk of going under. More than 1 million jobs across the country were on the line, and not just auto jobs, but the jobs of teachers, small business owners, and everyone in communities that depend on this great American industry. But we refused to throw in the towel and do nothing. We refused to let Detroit go bankrupt. I bet on American workers and American ingenuity, and 3 years later, that bet is paying off in a big way.
Yep, and less than another year later, Detroit is in fact bankrupt. So he got that one wrong. He said he refused to let Detroit go bankrupt, but they are bankrupt. I thought President Obama was going to stop Detroit from going bankrupt, but you know what? They went bankrupt anyway. So what is he going to do? Despite the fact that he bailed out the automobile companies, and of course, you know, interestingly enough, the automobile companies had more debt than Detroit. But Detroit's got $20 billion in debt. Is he going to come with a federal bailout of Detroit? Or is he going to let Detroit go bankrupt, which would contradict, you know, what he said? Of course, it wouldn't be the first time the president had contradicted himself. But there's going to be a lot of pressure to do just that. Now, what they might end up doing, they might do a loan guarantee. Let's say the federal government guarantees the debts of the city of Detroit, right? They might not call that a bailout because they say, well, it's not costing us any money because we're not giving them any money. We're just guaranteeing their debt. Well, what does that mean? That basically means that Detroit bonds become federal bonds, right? They're back just like student loans or mortgages, which means interest rates go down, which would be a disaster because it means now they can borrow all the money they want. They would have carte blanche, a blank check to go out and borrow a lot of money. But you know what that also means? That means that other municipal bond rates would go up because now they have to compete with Detroit that has a government guarantee and they don't. But what does that mean? If they guarantee Detroit's bonds, why don't they guarantee everybody else's bonds? Should the government guarantee all the muni bonds again? This is like the European problem. Should the Europeans bail out Greece? Well, the answer there is no, because there's a moral hazard. Well, there's an even bigger moral hazard to the U.S. government bailing out Detroit. If a city goes bankrupt, you don't socialize the losses among all the cities that aren't bankrupt because that's a moral hazard. What they have to do is let Detroit go bankrupt and then send a message to other cities and other states that they got to clean up their act before they become the next Detroit.